So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Rental Property Management During a Public Health Emergency webinar. My second screen is over here, so apologies for not looking at you while I'm reading. My name is Alex Longson, and I'm one of the 3 professional standards advisors here at the Real Estate Council in British Columbia. I'd like to welcome my co-presenters, Tyann Blewett, who is the Director of Policy at the Residential Tenancy Branch, and Al Kemp of AG Kemp and Associates, the former CEO of the Rental Owners and Managers Society of BC, and the Executive Director of the Manufactured Home Park Owners Alliance of BC. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're going to be busy. I don't even need to ask that question. As everybody knows, we've got a pretty hectic situation. So I thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And also thank you, everybody. I've got 118 participants. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today on what will hopefully be a really useful webinar for you. We recognise this is a very stressful time for everybody, not only you, your clients, but also the tenants that are in your rental properties. And we're doing our best to support you, your rental managers and the clients by providing as much guidance and information as we can through our COVID-19 website. And if you're unfamiliar with our website, it's recbc.ca. Just scroll down past the big picture of the mountain, and on the right-hand side, then you've got a link to all of our COVID-19 information with information for trading, rental, and strata managers. We are updating that information as quickly and as often as possible when new information becomes available. So please do check back on that webinar as often as you can. We also have checklists for all sectors of the industry, as well as frequently asked questions for consumers. So if you can't answer a question asked by your client or a tenant, you can point them there as well. And all of the information that we have on our website includes links to BC Housing, Residential Tenancy Branch, Landlord BC, and any organisation we can possibly think of that provides the information. So as we're going through these extraordinary circumstances during this pandemic, and we're practicing physical distancing, I ask for your understanding if anything goes awry with this webinar. We will be recording it. So for any reason you drop off the webinar, don't worry, it will be available, and you can of course log back in again. We're making it available so that you can share it with your peers, other employees in your office, your managers who couldn't attend. We want the information out as much as possible. We did also do webinars last week for the trading industry as well as for strata managers, and of course you're welcome to review those recordings as well. The offices of the Real Estate Council are closed. However, all of our staff are working from home, and we continue to be available to support you via phone and email for all of your licensing, education, audit and investigation questions. You can visit our website for information on how to contact those different departments. You can, of course, contact the professional standards advisors, and if it's a question that we can answer, we'll help you. If it's a question for another department, then we can pass you on to the other department. So in this webinar, our goal of this is to connect you with your peers. So all of you on the call, you've all got something useful to say. You've been working under these circumstances for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and you may all have good ideas that you may want to share with your peers on how to best navigate these issues. So I'm going to pass it over now to our moderators, who will explain how you can participate.
Hi there, everyone. August here speaking, and Sandra is also with us on the call to help manage the webinar. I'd like to just give you a quick tour of the interface before we get into the content of the webinar. We currently have you all muted to eliminate any background noise. But we will have a period in this webinar where we'll be able to ask you to share some of your experiences, questions, or comments, as Alex has mentioned. During the participation period, you can use the Q&A or chat message box to participate. But if you do wish to speak, you may also request to do so by using the raising your hand function. If you're on a PC, you'll likely find it at the top of the screen. If you hover around there, there should be a raise hand. Could people try that for me right now? We can see whether or not you're raising. Thank you, Brigitte. Simon, I see them. Perfect. Thank you. Sandra will clear the raised hands now. What'll happen is Sandra will unmute you in the order that you come up and introduce you so that you can absolutely ask your question or give your comments verbally. Please note, we've obviously disabled participant video by default. It's not necessary or mandatory for you to have your video on. I know a lot of you have put your full name in for privacy. If you feel you want to just put your first name or a nickname there, that's perfectly fine as well. But without further ado, I'll pass it back on to our presenters.
Okay, thank you, August. So before I open up to hear from you and take your questions, I wanted to share some of what we've been hearing over the last couple of weeks. We do support the decision by the provincial governments to designate real estate professionals as an essential service, but we want to remind you that this isn't business as usual. It's important that we continue to take steps to encourage physical distancing and follow the provincial health officer's guidance and orders. Probably the first thing that comes to mind is rent payments. And understandably, we've had a number of questions about rent payments and how to collect rent, in particular how payments are collected and whether or not you can collect rent by e-transfer instead of cash. I will come on to e-transfer specifically, but we do encourage rental property managers and of course the brokerages to collect rent by some other method other than cash. Remembering that any electronic payment should be into a brokerage trust account. Make sure that you don't allow your rental managers to agree with the tenant to transfer the money into the rental manager's personal bank account and then transfer it to the brokerage. Of course, the money has to go straight to the brokerage. The reason I'm being cautious in regards to e-transfer is I do know that many banks have limits on the maximum amount of cash that can come in by e-transfer into a bank account each day. So before you suggest to the tenants to do e-transfer, I would look at other methods such as pre-authorized debit or pre-authorized payment agreements. E-transfer, you're going to run out of headroom on the trust account very quickly, and then you may not be able to collect many rent payments per day, which of course would be problematic from a real estate counsel point of view. So I'm going to pass it over to Tyann and Al if you have any suggestions or comments.
The only thing that I'll say is that according to the Act, the landlords can't restrict the type of payment that is made. I know these are unusual circumstances, and certainly I think people are always trying to do whatever they can to kind of make things work. So just a caution about talking to tenants and making sure that if e-transfer or some other way of paying rent other than cash is something that's needed, that they have the opportunity and ability to do that. So that would just be a caution.
Yeah, just add a point to Tyann's. What I've heard for many years is as long as you offer two methods of payment and don't restrict it to one method, it's okay. No, I can't quote the legislation on that. But.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the legislation talks about not being able to restrict the method of payment unless it's in the tenancy agreement. But to my point, just talk to each other and figure out what works and see what can come up. I mean, tenants don't want to be dealing in cash either in lots of circumstances. So there's probably ways of making it work for everybody.
Yeah, and we did just get a notice from one of the attendees to say that banks have raised the limits. So I'm very pleased to hear that, because I know that was one of the struggles that brokerages had early on when e-transfer was new. So that's good. Okay, well, I'm going to move on, and just so everyone who on the call knows, we can come back to some of these questions if you have questions at a later date. These are just questions that we've heard that appear to be the big issues. So in regards to trades management, we do know that getting trades to do work in a rental property might be a challenge for you right now. Some might be urgent work to plumbing or a furnace or something, and the trades just aren't wishing to go out right now. So I wonder if Tyann, if you've heard anything that you can make any suggestions on this, or Al?
Al, do you want to go first, or?
Okay, I think there's, there is a limitation on the entry into tenant suite. So that's probably the first thing. A landlord cannot give a notice of entry, as you would in normal circumstances. The order from the Solicitor General does not say that you cannot agree. You know, that's a double negative. That you cannot agree with a tenant to come in and do some work or anything of that nature. But I think we have to be really sensitive and try and strike the balance between what has to be fixed today or within the next week and what could wait. And again, talking to the tenants, I think Tyann and I are both going to say that a lot of times probably this afternoon. Talking to the tenants and say, can that wait for a couple of months, and we'll definitely fix it, but and we'll give you a little note confirming it or whatever. But obviously these are the tenants' homes, and we always have to respect that. I wouldn't want a stranger in my home, although I had a plumber in last week, but I know him pretty well. And that's the kind of situation that we're just going to have to deal with, along with many others that we've had no experience with.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I was just wondering if like the essential repairs. Oh, okay. I was just wondering if there was the essential repairs that a tenant might want to be fixed immediately. Anyone's having problems in actually getting the contractor actually out to agree to enter the unit.
So yeah, that's obviously the other side of the coin. Some contractors may say, I'm just not entering anybody's home right now. I don't know what other work they'll be doing, but.
Yeah, okay.
But if it's urgent, I don't want to prolong this, but I can't see a tenant saying, there's a leak in the tap and the water's running onto the floor, but you can't come into my unit. I don't think that would be happening. Yeah,
I didn't assume that would be. I've got a couple of questions here and comments that are coming in. And just seeing if they are commercial sites with the widespread closures. Getting work done can actually be more convenient, and it's easier for trades essential for even essential or discretionary repairs. So that's a good point. Obviously, with the commercial units, they're very likely to be empty at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's good. So the questions, I've got a couple of questions here. Just going back actually to the rent payment. So maybe we should just dwell on that a little bit longer. So forgive me for skipping back, because I don't want to leave these. So somebody had made a point that there are limits to the amount of funds you can send, but they don't believe there's any limits to receiving funds via retransfer. I don't know. So that's a good point. You may just want to check with your bank. Question here, what about if the tenant says he can pay part of the rent? If we accept that, do we need to put it in writing that he is liable to pay the rest? And is this enforceable or not? I guess this is probably a question for you first, Tyann.
Yeah, so I mean, what's the order made by the Solicitor General that says that landlords cannot issue notices to end tenancy for non-payment of rent? That is just during the period of the emergency. Rent continues to be due, and we're telling tenants, you need to do whatever you can to try to make sure that you're in good standing on your rent, because when that order is lifted, all that rent will become due. So and you could be at risk of being evicted if you haven't been able to kind of pay those amounts. So in terms of, if tenants are paying part of the rent, you should absolutely be keeping records of that, giving receipts. I know that Landlord BC, and maybe Al, you have as well, have kind of drafted up agreements with tenants around how the rent might be deferred or paid, or you know, how things will happen during this period. But the message is that rent continues to be due. It's not a rent moratorium, but this is giving tenants time during the emergency to gather that money and not be at risk of being displaced from their home if they can't make the payments kind of in the manner that they would normally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just to add a few comments. Yes, all my clients, I created what I call a deferred rent agreement for them. And it basically says I will pay the full amount by X date, or I will pay so much a month. So there's flexibility built into that, of course. What I'm recommending, however, to my clients is to not use that type of agreement for more than 1 month's rent. Because looking ahead, which we're going to have to do sooner or later, if the tenant owes April's rent and September's rent and also owes May's rent, that's going to be 3 months' rent. And for most people, that would be a challenge or something beyond to be able to make it up. What I'm suggesting to my clients, if rent is not paid and you haven't been able to have a conversation with the tenant to make some arrangements, is to give a little letter saying that your rent must be paid in full. It has not been paid. Unless you make arrangements to pay your rent, you're putting your tenancy at risk. So that's a legitimate comment, I think, subject to what Tyann says. It's not a notice to end tenancy, but at some point, when all this settles down again, you may get a notice to end tenancy down the road.
Right. Thank you. I'm just looking at some of the comments. We've got the Q&A and we've also got the chat. So I'm just trying to read both of them as we go. There's been another comment in regards to the e-transfer saying it's through Interact, not your bank, and there is a maximum of $10,000 per 24 hours. So it does sound, from what people are saying, is that e-transfers is possibly going to work if you're a private landlord, but if you're a brokerage, that's not going to work for more than a few of the tenants. So look for the pre-authorized debit or pre-authorized payment instead. A question related to what we were just talking about: do tenants have to provide any sort of documents to prove they've lost their income, or do we just have to take their word for it? I'm guessing their word for it if they say they can't pay the rent.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the act, the issue is, did you pay or did you not pay? It's not, you know, did you have a good excuse not to pay? What we've done with the kind of suspending evictions is give people time, but the expectation is still that at the end of that time, tenants will have applied for financial compensation that might be available to them, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to get that payment in place. And if they can't, then being able to issue a notice to end tenancy is one of the options that the landlord will have kind of at the end of this state of emergency, whenever that might be.
Yeah.
Right.
What I'm advising my clients is tenants are applying for either the federal or provincial rent supplement. There's obviously application forms. The federal is similar to an employment insurance application. I haven't seen the provincial, it's not up yet. So asking for a copy of that, or to see a copy of that, I don't think the landlord needs to keep a copy necessarily, but at least to see one so that the privacy commissioner doesn't get upset. And a layoff notice from your employer, or some type of written notice from your employer saying you're now cut back to 10 hours a week. Anything of that nature, I think, is appropriate. And we have to remember, you know, Mrs. Jones has lived there for 15 years, and we can take her word. And Mr. Smarty moved in 6 months ago, and it's been a bit of a problem. You're going to treat those two tenants in a totally different way.
Okay. One of the resources that Tyann mentioned to me a little while ago is actually that BC Housing have now actually posted up on their website on the process for tenants to apply for the temporary rental supplement program. That's live, I assume, as of today, Tyann?
Yeah, it went up about 11:30 this morning.
Okay. Good. And I think the process is that they fill a part of it in, and then it goes off to the landlord, who completes the rest of it, and then hopefully the money comes flowing.
And I think it's really important to make sure you know about these supplements. They're phenomenal if you look at it from that standpoint, but they haven't been publicized that well by the governments. There's up to 500 a week for 16 weeks from the feds. There's up to 500 for at least 3 months, 500 per month from the province. And there's also an emergency workers benefit, and I haven't seen the application up for that one yet either, of a one-time payment of $1,000 from the province. It's 3 different websites and 3 different applications. But again, this is about being able to buy groceries as well as pay your rent.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'm looking at 2 different chats here. I just wanted to move on to the process for evictions. And maybe some of these are very specific, but I'll read this first one. A 2-month notice to move was issued on March the 13th for a tenant to move by May 31st to allow the owner's son to move in. What happens if the tenant refuses to move? And what happens if the tenant doesn't pay in May and then doesn't move? Is this just a situation where the son is going to have to find other accommodation until the emergency period is lifted?
Maybe. Any notices that were issued before the state of emergency, they remain valid. So it's a valid notice, but they're not enforceable during this period of time. So the landlord can't go to the courts and get the writ of possession. They can't hire bailiffs to come and remove the tenants. So there could be a situation where a tenant may not move, and the son or whomever was moving into the suite is going to be, without somewhere to go. What we're saying in these circumstances is, once again, try to talk to each other. We're telling tenants, if you can move safely, please do that. There's a domino effect, as everybody knows, if people don't kind of follow through and do what they say they're going to do. But in situations where people are being quarantined or told to self-isolate, or maybe can't hire movers because no one wants to come and touch their stuff, or maybe the place that they were moving into, that tenant isn't able to move. We get into situations where there isn't a lot of solutions, and that people are just going to need to talk to each other and try to figure out what they can do. It's not going to be forever. It's only going to be during this state of emergency, and there are going to be scenarios where things don't sort of unfold as everyone had expected, and we'll just continue to ask for people to try to be patient and compassionate and work together and figure out what they can do in those scenarios.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And Al, do you have anything you want to add on that one?
Not much more to what Tyann said. These situations are happening. I was involved with one where the possession date for the purchaser moving into the house was April 1st. The possession date for the home that the purchaser sold was April 1st. The tenants decided not to move, and the purchaser's now homeless, or trying to find some place to live. That would not happen in normal times, and we just have to keep telling people as we talk to tenants and owners and so forth. These are exceptional times, and they call for exceptional solutions, and sometimes there just isn't a solution.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. It's the big domino effect right now. Okay. Oh, the feedback there. I wasn't sure where that came from. Okay. I'm just going to see if there's any more that I can throw in regards to eviction. Okay. To be clear, does the not able to evict for non-payment apply only to residentials, not commercial?
Yes.
Yes, the ministerial order is just in regards to the Residential Tenancy Act. Okay. Okay, regarding the breaking of leases, have there been any changes, or are there any changes in the pipeline that would affect the extent to which a landlord can enforce a fixed term tenancy? I.e., if a tenant breaks a lease and moves out at the end of April, how many months can a landlord pursue the tenant for loss of revenue pertaining to COVID income related financial loss?
So there's been no change in that regard. It would be business as usual in terms of somebody who's leaving a lease early and what type of compensation they can apply for. And it would depend on, you know, a whole number of different things, including what was in the tenancy agreement. But there's no change in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the landlord would still have to do what the landlord normally does to try and find new tenants, which may be more challenging during this period, but the tenants that are breaking the lease are breaking the lease. So they need to understand they might be on the hook for 6 or 7 months rent at some point.
Right, thank you. Will the RTB have a COVID specific notice to vacate when this is close to over? Is there any plans for that? I've gone dark.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Certainly when it's over, if you have tenants that haven't paid rent, you can issue a notice to end tenancy as you could before for unpaid rent. And all the other reasons that you can now issue notices, you will be able to as well. So I think we just go back to business as usual. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, I think it does, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I didn't ask the question.
I have a lead into several of my emails. There's a ton of questions related to some time in the future that nobody has time to look at right now, and that's very valid. You know, there have to be some changes at the end. Well, I don't think we're ever going to back to capital N normal, but we can't expect answers to those questions today.
Indeed. Okay, I think this is not a question that we can actually answer. I think it's more just a comment. If the landlord has voluntarily given a reduction in rent, but depends upon the tenant to start the process, what is the incentive for the tenant to start that process when not starting the process is to the landlord's detriment?
The process of applying for compensation, maybe?
I think that's possibly
Yeah.
what they mean, yes.
Yeah.
I think the point is that, you know, at the end of the state of emergency, tenants need to have paid their rent. So there still is an incentive, even if rent's been reduced, the remaining amount is still due. So
Yeah.
As Al said, we want to really encourage people to take advantage of the financial compensation that's available and do their very best to try to keep on top of their rent payments so they're not in a position at the end where they're losing their housing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was on a national board meeting on Tuesday, and the consensus from several of Canada's largest landlords, April was about 5% unpaid rent that the tenant had not made any approach to the landlord. So given that there's money going to be flowing in this for April, we can hope that might be a smaller number. On the other hand, for those who haven't bothered to apply or aren't eligible, May could be a bigger number.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. I would expect it's going to go up on a month-by-month basis, as unfortunately we probably get more unemployment. Okay. I was told by a tenant today that they were not eligible for the $500 rent relief due to the fact that they had a pending application to BC Housing for subsidised housing. Can we clarify? Do we know anything?
Sure about that. I just looked quickly through the questions and answers. There may be some information on the BC Housing site. I did read that if you're getting other types of benefits from the province, housing benefits from the province, you may not be eligible, but I don't know if it's a pending application. But they could either look at the website at BC Housing, and they also have a call center that could probably answer that question.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I've got a couple of questions in regards to commercial tenancy. I did respond to somebody that yes, we will answer those questions, but I think I probably spoke a little bit too soon. I'm probably going to hold some of those commercial tenancy questions back for a moment. So apologies for those of you that did ask those questions. simply because I want to make use of Al and Tyann's time here today. Unless either of you want to dive into the commercial side of tenancy.
No, thank you.
No. Okay. So I apologize for the person that I said yes, we'd answer those on. But I will keep a record of those, and we can respond to those to you privately. I'll keep the Q&A thing open at the end of this meeting. And it might require that we have dialogue separately offline, contacting us at the council. I'm just going to share it. Somebody called me chicken.
They called us all chicken.
As long as that's you, Alex, and not us.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming it's to me. Yeah. And I've got his name. Okay. We've got a question here in regards to software. Has anybody, and this is a question for actually anybody, including the people on the call other than our panelists, has anyone had any success with an app or a program for creating virtual tours? Obviously, this would allow more potential tenants to view the unit without having to show every person who's just interested in walking around. I'm guessing there's probably not too many people wanting to be a looky look type person at the moment anyway, but I don't know if there's any software out there that people can use. So I'm throwing that one out there, and if anyone wants to respond back on the chat function for that would be great.
It is out there. There are software programs out there.
Yes.
I can't, but I've seen them.
Alex, may I actually input August here? I didn't expect to. As someone who's gone to, look at a rental place recently, they've actually done FaceTime Zoom meetings where they've walked around. The actual tenant actually helped walk around their own apartment and showed me everything. If you're willing to purchase some equipment, you can also buy a 360 camera. And then I don't want to do an ad for people, but there are some online software solutions where you can actually upload all the pictures. It stitches all the images for you if you have it on a tripod and creates this virtual tour. So you can Google online for a 360 camera, or just, lower tech, video conferencing kind of like this.
Excellent. Thank you, August. See, the system works. This is what we want. We want the input from other people to help each other. I'm getting a lot of questions here, specifically in regards to notice periods. I've got a question here, or just a comment in regards to, at the end of this meeting, can you provide in a nice clean message the exact websites, application sites, and what tenants can be eligible for? The writer has a number of tenants and they're getting a lot of mixed information. On the Real Estate Council's website, we've, under that COVID site, we do already provide a number of links, a number of frequently asked questions. And if you go to the residential tenancy branch and BC Landlord BC, the links on our site will link out to all of these other organisations. So the links are there. I'm going to say, and August can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to see if at the end, once we've completed the webinar and done the recording, we can do a splash page at the end of the webinar, the recorded webinar, with a link to any sites as well. But of course, anything that's going to be recorded on the webinar is captured as of today's date, whereas our website is live. So any new information will be available there. So that's probably the best place to go to.
Yeah, and I also have all three applications and websites and so on and so forth. So if somebody wants to give me a call, I have it.
Excellent. Thank you, Al. Okay, excellent.
Looks like there's a few questions about rent increase notices that I could probably answer if that's helpful.
You're on the chat.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, go for it. I was looking at the Q&A. Yes. Please do.
So the act says that no one can issue a new notice. Sorry, no rent increases can occur during the state of emergency. But if you've already issued a notice to rent increase, it just goes on hold until after the state of emergency. And if it's time for you to issue a notice of rent increase, you can also issue that. It also goes on hold. So if your 3-month period falls and the state of emergency is still in place, then you would have to just wait until the state of emergency was over. If the 3-month period went beyond the state of emergency, then it would remain valid. You wouldn't have to issue a new notice, and the date of that notice would come into play, and the rent would be increased on that date. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that leads into one of those unanswered questions. You're probably no better position than I am, Tyann, but I'll ask it anyways. So if I issue a notice of rent increase today in April, May, June, July, it would be effective August 1st. If the emergency order was lifted sometime in July, would I need to give any further notice, or would it still be August 1st, or is that still one of the many question marks?
It would still be August 1st.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping. Yeah.
Perfect. I've just got a quick request for Ian. He's posted in the Q&A a whole bunch of different software that's available. I don't know if everybody has access to the questions and answers, but I don't think so, in which case, Ian, could I just ask that you copy your list, and thank you for it, into the webinar chat function, and that way everybody's going to have access to that list.
They should be able to see it, but I will paste that because I don't think he can paste through to all attendees. So I'll do that for them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, August.
No problem.
And then Greg has suggested that Pluto.com is a quick and easy to use platform for anyone that isn't already set up with their bank to set up pre-authorized debit to collect rents or fees or make e-payments. It's pretty inexpensive compared to the typical bank's fees. So Pluto.com, it's not a plug, but it's something that Greg suggested would work. If a notice can't be served for non-payment of rent, do we send a letter via email to the tenant indicating that they haven't paid the rent? I ask so that we can have a record and acknowledgement from the tenant for future and have evidence of non-payment. I'm guessing that makes sense.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to clarify, the answer that I gave was around rent increases, and so you can continue to give notices for rent increases, but you can't continue to give notices to end tenancy during this time. Just to clarify that point.
Right. Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, I think it is a good idea to send the tenant a letter saying you're still responsible, pay your rent in full on time. There's government programs available, and if you choose to not pay your rent, you're putting your tenancy at risk. Because at some point, if that carries on, there would be a notice to end tenancy.
Yeah.
So I think putting your tenancy at risk is a good phrase to use.
Yes. Yeah, okay. We're getting a number of questions asking for the links to the different websites, including yours, Al. So rather than try and do that during the presentation, we'll do it all at the end. But again, I would drive people to the website where all of the links are available and live and in one place, because we're not going to be able to provide you all the links on this chat function without spending the next 15 or so minutes trying to find them. So please go to our website and you'll find all of the links there. Okay, so yes, I believe Greg is suggesting Pluto for a tenant solution for payment. I'm just trying to whiz through some of these questions here. Is email or electronic delivery of notice now accepted by the residential tenancy branch? how do we determine that it's received or prove that the landlord has served this information to the correct tenant or email?
Yes, it is. We have a director's order that allows email service during this period. If you go to the residential tenancy branch website, there's a link to the order which gives you all the details. Essentially, there are some requirements around making sure or having some evidence that the other person received it. But in the absence of that, I think there's an opportunity that if you've had regular correspondence with the other party through the email, that could count as well. So take a look at the residential tenancy branch website. It's called, it's a practice directive, or sorry, a director's order on email service, and it's on the right-hand side of our COVID page, and it gives all the details about what the rules are around service. But hopefully that will make it easier for people. Email service is something that we want to do in the future as well, which will help, and that was one of the rental housing task force recommendations that we're trying to get implemented over the next few months. So, but in the interim, we do have a process.
Okay, and another question.
Sorry, Alex. Personal service is no longer allowed under the emergency order for obvious reasons.
Thanks. Yeah,
So,
that's true.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I was just going to add a supplement from somebody else. When would the email be deemed delivered?
I think it's 3 days after.
Yeah, 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days after. Okay, thank you.
Unless you have evidence that they've read it earlier, like if they replied back to you within an hour, then it would be deemed received then.
Right, okay. Okay, so question here. If rent is reduced to a new tenant during this period, how can rent go back to the market level afterwards? Or can it?
You want me to tackle that one? I think you have to be careful with the terminology. So whether it's a new tenant or an existing tenant, you want to talk about the rent being, I'll say $1,500. And while the emergency order is in effect, we will rebate $300 of the $1,500. If you use rebate rather than discount, then the rent, I think, remains at $1,500, and an arbitrator would recognize that. Tyann?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for anybody that I'm skipping over their questions. I'm just trying to get through. We've got 15 minutes left. We have a quick question in regards to actually one of the early questions that I'll answer. Can a property manager, a rental property manager, hire a realtor as an unlicensed assistant? Well, actually, it sort of more goes back to the Real Estate Services Act. Any real estate licensee cannot act as an unlicensed assistant because they are licensed. Once you're licensed, you're always licensed. If you're licensed for trading, you can't be an unlicensed assistant for rental or for strata management. So there are certain things that an unlicensed assistant can do in any of the three applications, any of the three sectors of the industry. But a licensed person cannot be an unlicensed assistant, is the short answer. If you want more definition on that, I'm free to talk about that one for 15 minutes if you call me at the office after today. Okay, just a bit of a clarification from something we covered earlier. If a unit was sold and notice was given prior to the state of emergency, what would happen if the tenant doesn't want to move? And I think that's the same as if a new tenant was coming in and the tenant chose not to move. It would be the same situation, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are scenarios where people are moving and where people already have other accommodations set up and things are working as they're supposed to be. So, you know, talking to each other kind of as soon as possible, both for the tenants and the landlords. and finding out what's happening and making sure that people are following through if they can, or if they can't, what the other options are, I think is a good way.
Okay. I'm just going to go back to some of our frequently asked questions. We've had questions so far in regards to move-in and move-out inspections, as well as access to units for videoing purposes. I'm guessing all of that is spoken to in the ministerial order.
Yeah, so I mean, the move-in and move-out inspections, we had some questions from staff around those as well. I mean, most of the time, those are done when the units are empty. Both landlords and tenants have good reason to want to complete those, because if they don't, then it impacts their ability to get the security deposit. So, you know, I think that people just need to work together and figure out what makes sense, how to kind of complete these things without contravening the public health orders, making sure that there's, you know, social distancing, and that people are respected in terms of whether or not they can have access or not, being accommodating, I guess, in terms of how and when, all of those types of things. When we were working or contemplating the emergency order, there was a lot of concerns from tenants about showings, and, you know, people just coming into their suite without any consideration to what might be happening. And so that's why the restrictions are in place for landlords around being able to access suites whenever they want. But we do expect that the tenants will try to accommodate those requests where it's reasonable and where possible. And things like video, you know, is a good option for people. Certainly, you know, suites need to get rented if somebody's moving out, and if you don't want 100 people coming through your suite, then maybe video might be a really good option to try to make that work for each other. So, you know, asking people to really kind of work together and give and take, and acknowledge that it's difficult on both sides. It's not business as usual, and it's going to be hard to do some of the things that we would normally do. And so wherever possible, you know, people being able to do that give and take and accommodate reasonable requests, I think will make it easier for everybody.
Yeah. Al?
What I've been suggesting to some of them, it's the landlord's responsibility for the move-in, move-out process. So if you're doing a move-out in particular, there's often more questions. The landlord goes through and does the move-out, has hand sanitizer with him, records the move-out, records anything on the move-out inspection report, then lets the tenant go through and review the report after the tenant is finished, and then hopefully reach some agreement. It's not as obviously as effective as both people walking through together, but that allows social distancing to be maintained for sure.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I've got a question here. What happens if the current tenant doesn't move out and the new tenant now has nowhere to go? Is the landlord going to be responsible for finding and paying for accommodation for the new tenant? And is there any way to charge? Would they be charging that back to the old tenant, or is it just a cost of doing business?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the legislation that would allow or require anybody to find accommodation for the other party. I think these are scenarios where people are going to have to talk to each other and try to figure out what makes sense and what the options are. But you know, there's nothing that would allow them to charge that back to the tenant. I guess they could go before an arbitrator and try to make that case, but yeah, I don't think that's, certainly during the state of emergency, there's no provisions that would allow that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and here we come to tenancy agreements. The tenancy agreement we use, for example, and it's very similar to Landlord BC's, there has always been an overholding clause that if a tenant fails to move, the landlord has a contract with the incoming tenant and has the obligation to, you know, put up in a hotel and provide some meals or so forth. But the outgoing tenant will be financially responsible for whatever the landlord has to pay for the tenant who can't move in. So you want to know what's in your tenancy agreement. That's so important.
Okay.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure like if that could be enforceable during the state of emergency either. So you might want to get some advice on that.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got just a few minutes left. About 9 minutes left. Can we issue a 2-month notice to vacate during the pandemic for owner use?
No.
No. Okay.
The order is very clear. You cannot issue a notice to end tenancy, period. It doesn't matter what the reason is.
Right. I've got a. Okay. If the rental agreements are in the management company's name, can the government rental subsidy still be accessed?
I don't see why not.
No, I mean, they're acting as the agent for the owner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the application to BC Housing has to be submitted and signed, or has to be signed by both the landlord and the tenant. So I don't think it would be different than any other document. If you were filing for dispute resolution, you'd put the landlord's name as it is on the tenancy agreement, and I think it would probably be the same thing here.
Okay. Anything to add on that, Tyann?
No. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
not sure about that. I think that's probably reasonable.
Okay. I think we probably covered this answer already. But how do you handle the quarterly inspections required by some municipal bylaws to ensure there's no manufacture of illicit drugs on site?
I can't see any municipality having a bylaw officer issue fines because the tenant didn't want you to enter their suite. I mean, if that bylaw officer exists, I think I know what should happen to him or her.
Yeah. There are still provisions in the Act that allow landlords to enter suites where there's risk to life or property. So, you know, in extreme circumstances where something was happening in the unit and the landlord needed access, those provisions still exist. But what we want to make sure is for everything else, that there's conversations between the tenant and the landlord, and that the tenant has the opportunity to say, you know, no, this isn't a good time, or let's do something instead, and they don't have to just accept, you know, people coming into their home during the pandemic or during the state of emergency.
I think that provision is so critical, really, for both parties. But back on the quarterly inspection, you need to check your insurance policy as well. A lot of them require inspections every 60 days or 90 days or whatever. Hopefully the insurance companies would be as reasonable as the bylaw officers, but who knows?
Yeah, and somebody's just made a comment on the chat function here that they do quarterly inspections and they were done by the tenant virtually, i.e. they send a video to us and the insurance company seems satisfied with that as of now.
Good.
So yeah, good to know. Somebody just asked a quick question: who's the best person to contact at the Real Estate Council regarding strata matters? Call any of the professional standards advisors. If it's something that's within our jurisdiction, we'll absolutely be able to advise you. And if it's not our jurisdiction, then we can definitely point you in the best direction for somebody that can respond to you.
Alex, can we add one that nobody's asked about?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah, also in the management order, the landlord, so in an apartment building, can close off common areas, so fitness centers, swimming pools, club rooms, dining rooms, so on and so forth. They can be closed so that, again, the social distancing is maintained, and that would not be a withdrawal of a facility or service requiring a rent reduction.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just trying to look through to see if we've got any quick questions we can ask. Would the rental property manager sign as the landlord, or do you need the owner's signature and contact information? I'm guessing that's in relation to the rent subsidy application. I think we probably covered that.
Yeah, I can follow up with BC Housing and make sure that
Hmm.
they have that question somewhere on their website, and if not, get them to put it on.
Great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Tyann. All right, I'm just okay, we've answered that one. So I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anything, and I'm scooting past some, so I apologize to anyone that I'm scooting past your question. We've literally just got a few minutes left. So I'm just going to try and find some that we can answer quickly. Somebody's made a comment that they use the software cvirtual360.com is another way for you to do the virtual tours. Somebody's asked a question here about short-term residential furnished corporate rentals where the typical tenancy length is 3 to 6 months. So quite a lot of turnovers every month. What special requirement must we do during turnovers to avoid being sued by tenants or owners if somebody got sick? I'm not sure if that's a tenancy or if that's a license to occupy that they're asking about there.
Well, it would still be a tenancy if it's not in a manufactured home community. I think what it is Company X, and this is particularly in the northern part of the province, rents a unit, and employees who are 4 weeks in and 4 weeks out live in the unit.
Okay.
There's a turnover of almost sublettees, if you will. The company is always the landlord, or always the tenant, sorry. But there's different people coming and going. So I wouldn't see any difference from what existed before. Usually the landlords have certain rules around, checking the person coming in, making sure they're an employee and that sort of thing.
Okay.
But in terms of the, how to sanitize the suite, I guess I'd suggest that they look to the public health office and some of the recommendations around making sure that surfaces are clean and do the best that they can to be able to make sure that they're doing their part in maintaining safety.
Yeah, and that would follow on from their contract with the landlord to make sure the property is clean after every occupant moves in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was struggling on the word there, occupant. I was thinking subtenant, so no. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left. Which is a better term to use for rent reduction, discount or rebate in this COVID pandemic?
Well, we covered that before. Rebate, I think, is a safer word to use, if you will.
Okay. If a 10-day notice was issued to end tenancy, was issued prior to the emergency order, and the 10 days have lapsed before the emergency, but an order cannot be given for possession as that is applied during the emergency, does the landlord need to send an additional notice to end tenancy if April's rent is not paid after the emergency has ended? What happens to the earlier 10-day notice?
So that earlier notice remains valid. It's just that you can't get a writ of possession and you can't get a bailiff to come and enforce it. So, keeping track of further unpaid rent, I think makes sense. But you should be able to enforce that order after the state of emergency is lifted.
But one thing to be careful of, so you can get an order of possession. Again, as Tyann says, that's the end of the road until the order is lifted. Any money that is paid after the tenancy has ended, so in this case, after the 10 days, accept it, but always give a receipt that says to the effect of for use of occupancy only does not constitute reinstated of the tenancy agreement. If you accept rent, quote unquote, after the order of possession is issued or after the end of tenancy, an arbitrator could well rule that you reinstated the tenancy and you got to start all over again. So that's an important thing that most rental managers know that.
Okay, I'm going to defer to the experts on that one. Okay, so
after the tenancy is ended, they still owe you to occupy the place. It's not a license to occupy, but always give a receipt that stresses this is for you're using and occupying my property. It's not for renting my property.
Right. Okay. Well, we were just about reaching the end. It's now 2:30. So there was a comment I wanted to make to all of those on the call. Obviously, with everything that's going on and all of the changes and the different ways that you're doing business and the changes to the emergency order, the ministerial order, it's very, very important that you keep your clients, the actual owners of the property, very well informed and let them know what you can and you can't do and what the law requires at this point in time. I can't stress that enough, because if the owner doesn't know what's going on, and maybe because maybe they don't have access to the local news, maybe they're in a different country, or they've got their own health issues going on, make sure you keep them informed, because that way you can help avoid it. They're coming to be a complaint to us, which is of course one of the things we don't want to happen. So are there any final comments that either of you want to make before we wrap up?
I think the questions have done a really good job at covering pretty well everything that's important.
Yeah, I would just say there's, take advantage of the residential tenancy branch website. We have staff on the phones from Monday to Friday who can answer all sorts of really detailed questions that you might be experiencing. I'm really happy to see some of the creative ways that people are kind of trying to manage in this unique time and come up with ways of working through complicated situations. If there are questions that don't seem to be answered, please let us know, and we can make sure that information is available. And it's changing daily. Things are coming up, new issues, new benefits. So kind of keep apprised of information that's happening, and check back regularly, because things are being replaced with other things and changed. And yeah, that's probably all I would say for now. I appreciate the opportunity to come, and hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions and can continue to do that going forward.
Excellent.
And a commercial for the residential tenancy branch. If you haven't phoned them recently, there's no more 45 minutes waiting to talk to an information officer. The branch was given extra resources. They have extra staff. Your call may not be answered instantly, but it'll certainly be answered within a reasonable time.
Yeah, thanks, Al.
Thank you both. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you everybody that has joined us for the last hour. We will wrap it up now, and I will say, if there's any questions that we haven't answered, I'm gonna keep the Q&A thing open for a little while longer, just see if I can answer. And it might be that my answer is just going to be, give us a call at the office, or actually not at the office, but you know where we are, our virtual offices, and one of the professional standards advisors will talk you through and maybe point you in the right direction. So,
and if need be, Alex, you can flip the question over to me for a couple of days.
Absolutely, yes. You know what? I would be happy. I might ask August, dropping August in it now. If it's possible, he can copy all of those unanswered questions, and maybe he just wants to share them with us, between the three of us.
Yes, we can manage that after the call.
Excellent. Thank you, August. That would be brilliant.
No, and the recording for this webinar will be available on our website, recbc.ca, roughly about midweek next week, after the long weekend. Okay.
Thank you very much. And just a final comment. Somebody said they called their office 2 weeks ago. Please do call again. A lot of things have happened in the last 2 weeks. I don't know which department you called, but please do call back again. We are all working. Okay, so thank you very much again. Thanks. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.